Hello class 11, this is the physics teacher D. Pradhan, and starting with this video we are going to do our lessons on the board. I think this will be much better than doing it on paper and trying to explain you things there. For which reason of course I've got this board and hence in this makeshift classroom. Now talking about this room, since it's an empty room, there's a bit of reverberation going on. So any problem you have with the audio quality, you can let me know. You're of course free to give your feedbacks regarding the video. Also I want to tell you that before we start with the lessons, you can pause the video and do get your exercise book and a pen ready so that you can copy the important things that we write on the board, and also you can jot down things that we discuss during the course of the video. So with these few instructions, let us start with the lesson. As you can see written, the topic that we are going to start with is friction. You obviously have heard about friction and you must have studied about friction in your junior classes also. And do remember therefore, friction is a force which acts or comes into play whenever a body moves. Now when we say moves, what we mean to say is whenever the body slides or rolls over the surface of another body. That is, whenever there is any relative motion, whenever a body moves with respect to another body, then at the points of contact between the two bodies, there is always an invisible force that comes into play, which is your friction. Now, these are some of the basic points that I've written about friction. It acts at the point of contact in the two bodies, of course, two surfaces or two bodies. It acts in a direction opposite to the direction of motion of the body. So to say this is the ground and we have this body over here which is moving towards your right hand side. So this is the direction of motion of the body. So where does friction act? So when the body is moving towards the right hand side, friction always acts at these points. That is the points of contact between the two bodies, and friction is always directed in a direction opposite to the direction of motion of the body. So if friction is denoted by a small f, friction is in the direction opposite to the direction of motion of the body. Thereby remember, friction always opposes motion. Always opposes motion. And a basic fact about friction, friction also always produces heat. We know this fact when, we rub our hands, we've experienced it, we rub our hands, we start feeling warm. Alright, that is of course because of friction producing heat. Now talking about this definition of friction, what we've written is friction is a force which acts when a body moves over the surface of another body. Now, to tell you a fact, this definition is true. Yes, it is true, because friction comes into play when a body moves over the surface of another body. But remember, this definition is not telling us the complete truth. Why? Because friction not just acts when there is relative motion between two bodies, because friction also acts when a body is about to move over the surface of another body. That is, when the body is not exactly moving, not actually moving, but just about to commence its motion over the surface of another body, of course. Therefore, if the body is still static, not moving, then also friction comes into play, remember. Okay, so to elaborate on that point further, let me erase the things written on the board, for which purpose you can pause the video and first of all copy the things written on the board quickly. Alright? I believe you've done that. Okay, so I have this makeshift duster again. So I'm going to erase the things written on the board. Erase. Alright. So I will say friction also acts when a body is just about to commence its motion over the surface of another body. Now when a body is about to commence its motion over the surface of another body, the body is not yet moving, So for this body to start motion over the surface of another body, okay, what should be true is there has to be some force acting. Capital F is the applied force. Now this force is such that I'm trying to push something heavy, say for example a cupboard or a bed at home. So I'm trying to apply a force, I'm trying to push it, but my force is not enough to make the body move. So I'm trying to push it, it's still not enough to make the body move. So what I do, I have to increase my force to make the body move. Alright, so that is the state I'm talking about. So I'm applying, we have an applied force capital F, but this body is not moving. Okay, now why isn't the body moving? What is preventing the body from movement? What is preventing it is the moment I apply an external force because of which I want to make the body move, there is a force of friction that acts between the point of contact in the two bodies. Although the body is not yet moving, mind you. And this force of friction that acts between these two surfaces, although this body is static, is what is called, this force of friction is itself called static friction. From the name of the force itself you can make out, the body has to be static, that is not moving. So initially I apply a small force to make the body move, but that force of course is not enough to make the body move. So the body is not moving, but I have my force applied. So I increase my external force, but still this increase in force is not enough to move the body. Why? Because what happens is this static friction has such an ability that it also increases when the external force increases. So to say the static friction increases proportionately. So when I increase my external force, what happens is the force of static friction also increases proportionately. I further increase my external force, the force of static friction also proportionately increases. But mind you, the force of static friction cannot go on increasing infinitely such that this body will forever remain static. Okay? Because the force of friction has a limit. The force of static friction has a limit up to which only it can increase. So it has a maximum value up to which it can increase. Okay? After which, when I increase my external applied force, what happens is this external force overcomes the maximum force of static friction, and then after the body starts moving. So this maximum value of static friction has a name. It has a name. It is called limiting friction. Okay, and how do we define it? The maximum value of the static friction at which point the body is on the verge of movement. The body is on the verge of movement. Okay, this maximum value of static friction when the body is on the verge of movement is what is called limiting friction. Okay, don't get confused. Limiting friction is also static friction, remember. Alright, so this is the friction which acts when the body is not yet moving but is about to move. Alright, so once the body starts sliding, okay, then we no longer talk about static friction, because static friction is not existing now. When the body starts sliding, the friction that comes into play then after is, let me erase the definition of friction also. So we have capital F, force applied, or let me rather write the topic to be kinds of friction. So the first kind we've discussed about is static friction. Let me write straight. The second kind of friction, when the body starts sliding, okay, from the kind of movement of the body, the friction has its name, it's called simply sliding friction. And the third kind of friction, if this body had wheels, then the body would not of course slide, it would roll. And therefore, the friction that comes into play when a body rolls over the surface of another body is called rolling friction. So these are the three kinds of friction, remember. Static friction, when we have an external applied force, but still the body is not moving, the force of friction is called static friction. There is a special kind of static friction which is called a limiting friction, which is the maximum value of static friction when the body is on the verge of movement, mind you. And the force of friction that acts when the body slides over the surface of another body, then that friction is called sliding friction. When the body rolls over the surface of another body, that friction is called rolling friction.